Welcome to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks. I'm a retired 20-year veteran sergeant of the Los Angeles Police Department, and I am not afraid to pull the covers back, expose that thin blue line, and talk to you honestly and candidly about police training, police policy, and a whole lot about police culture. Hey family, welcome to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks across all my social media platforms, YouTube, Instagram, Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, Twitter, Sergeant Dorsey Speaks, and Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, as well as Facebook. I am going to be sharing with you a little bit of a video that I did today with my girl, Isha Sesay, over, well, she's working from home. She's social distancing like the rest of us, and I first met her as an anchor for one of the cable networks. Can I say it like that? And we have been, she's been interviewing me on hot button items over the years. More specifically, we did an interview on the 25-year anniversary of the beating of Rodney King. We talked about what hadn't changed, in my opinion. And so now, fast forward, protests in Ferguson, no change, no substantive reform, accountability, no real transparency, no honesty from police chiefs across the nation as they try to minimize and mitigate that bad behavior. And so we talked, of course, about what's going on right now, the murder of George Floyd on today. The other three officers were charged with aiding and abetting, which means helping. They were co-conspirators in the murder of George Floyd, as well as being charged with aiding and abetting in on a manslaughter charge. So the other three officers, Thomas Lane, J. Alexander Kueng, and Tou Thao, that's how you pronounce his name. He's the officer who stood sentry. All three have been charged, and also the main offender, fired officer Derek Chauvin, has been recharged with second-degree murder as opposed to third degree. And I said all along that, listen, intent is there and it's easily proven, I felt, but I understand that district attorneys typically want to take a charge that they feel they can win. This is still not a slam dunk. We're still in first gear with this situation. There's a long, long way to go. And so I've been doing a series of interviews over the last week, and when I tell you they are wearing me out, they are wearing me out. I have been interviewed by journalists in New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, China, as well as local, national networks here in the U.S. And so while I'm tired, I am going to continue to take my vitamins and stay at it, because the truth must be told. And in addition to continuing to beat the drum for justice in the murder of George Floyd, let us not forget our sister Breonna Taylor, who also was murdered at the hands of errant police officers in the midst of serving a no-knock warrant. She's gotten kind of lost in the shuffle. We haven't heard much said about that. I'd like to know, where are the body cam recordings for that incident? What's going on with those officers who, it's been reported, were judge shopping to get that no-knock warrant? That sounds to me like they knew they didn't really have solid ground to stand on with regards to serving a no-knock warrant at her home. We now know that they were at the wrong house. We now know that the suspect who was involved had been previously arrested. And so I'm going to play for you now my video today with my sister girl, Isha.
Happy Wednesday. It is Deep Dive Wednesday here on Home with Isha Sesay, and you know what that means. Deep Dive Wednesday is a day where we essentially go deep with a subject. We bring on the experts to help us understand what's really going on, which for the last few weeks, if you've been watching the show, has been entirely focused on the coronavirus pandemic. We are doing things differently here today and for the next few days, merging our coverage of the pandemic with events here in the United States. I'm sure that you haven't been able to miss what is happening. The fact that in city after city here in the US, people have taken to the streets to protest the killing of George Floyd, an unarmed black man at the hands of a white police officer in Minneapolis in the state of Minnesota. America is in absolute turmoil, and as someone who is sitting here right now, even though I'm in lockdown here in LA, you feel that turmoil, you feel that tension that is playing out, and it has black people, whether you're African American or you're from the continent, the diaspora, it has people of color all questioning the institutions here in the US and how to make this place more inclusive. Those protests, these questions have led to a kind of roiling up of emotion, and we've seen stores vandalized, we've seen looting, we've seen clashes with the police, and police have used tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse crowds. It is important to say the protests have largely been peaceful, but then there have been these moments that have erupted, and there are questions as to who is behind the violence that we have seen. As a result of all of this, major cities have enacted curfews. There's a curfew right here in Los Angeles as well. But even though those curfews are in place, people continue to gather, continue to protest, to demand that their voices be heard. All of this is happening against the backdrop of this coronavirus pandemic. It is still in play. It has not gone away, even though it has been somewhat pushed into the background by events here in the United States. The numbers here in the US are staggering. I mean, week after week, we've told you about the situation in Africa, but to bring the US center stage for a second, over 1.7 million cases of coronavirus here in the United States. More than 100,000 people have died. The expectation is that the second wave, which everyone has talked about, is coming, and it's coming soon, and it could be deadlier. There is a lot to get through. Let's get started. Well, as thousands of people rally in the streets across the United States, we cannot forget why this all started in this moment. On March the 25th, we watched in horror as this man, let's put his image up, this man, George Floyd, was killed by a police officer who put his knee on his neck and kept it in place for nearly 9 minutes. 9 long minutes, nearly. Officer Derek Chauvin kept his knee there on George Floyd's neck. Over and over again, he stated, "I can't breathe." Over and over again, bystanders, onlookers said, "He can't breathe. You are killing this man." 4 officers were on the scene. 4 police officers were there on the scene, but none of them came to George Floyd's aid. In fact, there were a number of other officers, 2 other officers, who also were holding Floyd down. But once you've seen those pictures, they can't be unseen, and everyone who has seen them has been affected, and that impact has led to people taking the streets in huge numbers. And as these protests have grown, we have waited for words from the White House. And when President Trump addressed the cameras, when he broke his silence, he said this. Take a listen.
All Americans were rightly sickened and revolted by the brutal death of George Floyd. My administration is fully committed that for George and his family, justice will be served. He will not have died in vain. But we cannot allow the righteous cries and peaceful protesters to be drowned out by an angry mob. I am taking immediate presidential action to stop the violence and restore security and safety in America. I am mobilizing all available federal resources, civilian and military, to stop the rioting and looting, to end the destruction and arson, and to protect the rights of law-abiding Americans, including your Second Amendment rights. Therefore, the following measures are going into effect immediately. First, we are ending the riots and lawlessness that has spread throughout our country. We will end it now Today, I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
We waited for the president to speak, and when he did, he talked about dominating and the use of force. I want to bring in guests for this deep dive Wednesday. There's a 20 veteran with the Los Angeles Police Department, a mother of 4 boys. She is a social justice advocate. We can count on her to provide a candid analysis of the situation in the U.S. when it comes to policing and the way ahead. Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey is someone I've interviewed many times in the past, and she has a unique perspective on social and institutional abuses. She's also the author of Black and Blue, Creation of a Social Advocate. Let's show you her book. You've got to get it. You've got to read it. Black and Blue, Creation of a Social Advocate. I'm so pleased that Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey joins us now. She will be with us throughout the hour. Send your questions in. You know we do Deep Dive Wednesday so that you can put your questions to the experts, to the people who know, who can answer with an expertise and with all the facts. So send your questions in. You know how this works. So let's get started. Sergeant Dorsey, Cheryl, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to have you with us as we try to make sense of these very, very difficult times here in the United States. I want to just let our viewers know that we're standing by waiting to hear from the Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who is expected to announce, make a significant announcement about charges. Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota has already tweeted that we expect to see Officer Chauvin, who had initially been charged with third-degree murder, manslaughter, face new charges, and we are expecting the other officers to also be charged. Let me start with that imminent news, Cheryl, and ask you your thoughts on that, the issue of charging of ex-police officers now.
Well, we've been waiting, and I knew that the investigators were working behind the scenes to put everything in place, and I figured that, you know, they only going to get really one bite at the apple, and so it was important for them to have all their ducks lined up in a row. And so I'm waiting to see, as is everyone else, exactly what the charge will be for these other 3 and what additional charges they're going to bring about for Derek Chauvin.
The man whose image has been seared into our minds, the Derek Chauvin, again, initially, or to date, because it hasn't been formally confirmed, was charged with third-degree murder, manslaughter. Did you think that was appropriate, given everything you had seen on the videos and various videos?
I didn't think it was appropriate. I thought that they were being a little lazy. And listen, I'm not an attorney, but I'm a patrol supervisor. I manage, oversee, evaluate uses of force. And as a patrol supervisor, watching him sit on the neck of George Floyd for over 8 minutes with deliberate intent, I can prove it with glee almost. He enjoyed seemingly what he was doing. And I, as a supervisor, watched him do things that I know we're trained to do, which is ways in which he created additional pressure and leverage, because he doesn't look like he's a big guy. And so I saw him get on the tiptoe of his boot. And the reason he had his hands in his pocket, I believe, again, was to create more downward momentum. That's something that was intentional. He wanted to make sure all 100 and whatever he is, 30, 40, 50 pounds, was squarely on the neck of George Floyd. And so when you do that as a tenured police officer with 19 years on the department, who's been involved in many probably uses of force, certainly we know he's been involved in at least 18 personnel complaints, he knew exactly what he was doing. And when others were begging and imploring him to let me take his pulse, get up off of him, he can't breathe, Mr. Floyd is saying, you're killing me. And he did nothing to relieve that pressure, to stop that flow of blood that was he was stopping the flow of blood going to his brain and ultimately, killed him. It was intentional. He had to know. He's trained to know. And to argue anything different is intellectually dishonest and disingenuous.
Okay. So now I'm hearing Jennifer M.Y. Tengre saying second-degree murder confirmed. I'm going to check in with our team to see whether that's actually been confirmed by the Minnesota Attorney General. We know that Amy Klobuchar is saying that's the expectation, that's what's going to happen, but we haven't heard it from the Attorney General himself. Cheryl, you brought up training, so let's start right there as we go deep in this conversation. Everybody wants to know, myself included, everyone around the world, it's a conversation we're all having in our homes. How exactly, or what are the techniques taught to police officers, your former police officer, to restrain individuals? What's allowed, what's not allowed? This knee in the neck, is that something folks are trained to do?
No, not actually in that way. But we know that officers do it all the time. And the reason that officers do it is because it's a way to punish. It's not about gaining control or compliance. It's about punishment. Just since we saw Mr. Floyd lose his life with a knee in his neck, there was imagery of a female police officer up in San Francisco, which is now being investigated by the police chief there, because she too put her knee in the neck of a teenage boy, looked like to me. But let me tell you how I was trained on the Los Angeles Police Department. And what we were trained to do is generally in a felony stop. You've seen many times when someone is at the end of a police pursuit, let's say, they pull the driver and the passengers out of the car, everybody lies face down, and you tell them to turn their head away from you. It's an officer safety technique so that they don't see you as you approach. You turn their head away from you, you approach from the head, from the tip of the head as they're laying down, again, so that it's an officer safety issue. If maybe they have a gun in their waistband, they can't reach for it and point it and shoot you because they don't know exactly where you are. So what we're trained and taught to do is, as we approach, before we do that, we order and instruct you to put your hands in the small of your back, palms up. One hand on top of the other, palms up, so that you're already in a position where I can quickly cuff you. As I approach you from the head, I will put my knee between your shoulder blades, not on your neck, but between your shoulder blades. And I'll do that very quickly. I'll grab your hands, I'll cuff you, and I'm off. I'm only there as long as it takes me to get those handcuffs on you and then get off of you with my body weight. And so that's why for that officer to sit there, just sit on his neck for nearly 9 minutes and then use his feet to create leverage and bear down even harder on this Mr. Floyd, lets you know that it was intentional. Absolutely.
The training that you receive beyond this question of the knee in the neck, is it racialized? Let me ask you that.
Well, listen, I think it's officers who are drunk with power, who haven't been deterred from bad behavior, and I can tell you, you can take race out of it. It's officers who are pissed off, right? I trademarked the term contempt of cop I use often. When I say contempt of cop, what I mean is if you piss me off, I don't care about your ethnicity, you piss me off, there's a price to pay. And that price can sometimes mean pain. We're taught many things in the police academy in terms of how to take someone into custody, how to gain control. And some of those are called pain compliance holds. So we're taught how to inflict pain. And sometimes the pain is to get you to stop what you're doing so I can get you in control, and you only use that much force necessary to overcome the resistance, that amount of pain that I'm inflicting to overcome resistance. And then there's those few occasions that we see over and over again where officers are inflicting pain because they're pissed off, because you made me chase you on foot in a car, because you didn't come here, you didn't comply, I don't like the way you answered my question. You've seen all the reasons and instances in which an officer, when he's mad about a thing, and so now we're going to use that stuff that we've been trained to do and then twist it just a little bit for that added little to punish you. And that's what we saw.
And so let me ask you this: if you're not trained, are you trained to racially profile the communities that you police?
It's not formal training, right? I mean, you know, they don't have a class on it, but if you have a partner, if you're a young officer and you're working with a senior officer, much like these other three were to Derek Chauvin, they were junior to him. And I said that in the beginning. I figured that they were junior to him, and that's why they didn't step in and stop him, because he probably has a reputation around that department as being a Billy Badass. And he's probably has a reputation for mistreating people, and nobody wants to be the one to step in and say something and have word get back to the division that you didn't back your partner when he was out there handing somebody their ass. So no, it's not formally trained, but it's certainly something that is demonstrated, and in many instances officers will emulate, particularly if you are a younger on the job officer. If you're a probationary officer and you don't have the intestinal fortitude to say, I'm not doing that, I'm not going to acquiesce, I'm not going to participate in misconduct, then it becomes a part of the fabric of who you are as a police officer.
So you're not taught that there's this issue of, you know, letting whomever is the lead cop do whatever he is, because the question of solidarity is important in every club, and I guess policing is the ultimate club. But so I guess the question is, why, or to better yet, to get your perspective as to why do we continue to see the killing of unarmed black men and women in this country? What is the root of that?
Accountability. If you don't do anything to deter bad behavior, it's not like there isn't policy that already exists. But if you don't do anything to deter the bad behavior, if there's no consequence when you violate that policy, if you know that a police chief is more concerned about circling the wagons and protecting the entity and not saying anything that's going to be detrimental when that civil lawsuit comes, because they understand one is generally going to follow a death, an in-custody death, a murder. And so rather than say something that will benefit the family of the deceased, they pretend like, oh no, it's, you know, it's what we do, I didn't really see that. Something happened before the video started that would explain it. You've not done the job, and you don't know how difficult it is, and officers have to make split-second decisions. I heard Senator Cory Booker yesterday say that one of the things that he wanted to do was to create a national registry. And while I applaud my brother, really, Senator, do we need a national registry? Do we need a list of officers like Derek Chauvin maintained somewhere in Washington, D.C.? Is that going to stop him? What we need, Senator Booker, is, well, you need to call me. Let me say that. But what we need, Senator Booker, is we need those officers to be held accountable. We need those officers, when they violate policy and take a life, by the time it makes national news and we see it, it's not the first time. So when that happens, Senator Cory Booker, we need them off the department. We need their license taken away if that's what they have. We need their police officer standard and training certification, post-certification stripped, so that they can't do what Betty Shelby did after she shot and killed Terrence Crutcher and move on to a neighboring police department, so that Timothy Loman can't do what he did after he shot and killed Tamir Rice, so that officers like Michael Schlager, who had tasered 2 people previously before he pumped 8 rounds into the back of Walter Scott, didn't live to offend again. We have examples and instances of officers doing the same thing over and over and over on their own department, on that list, not national but local, right? Police chiefs know, and they do nothing. So that's what needs to happen.
Is it the deliberate? I mean, again, the reason I come back to this, you know, the point was raised to this administration's national security advisor as to whether there is endemic racism within law enforcement here in the United States, and he said no. But it seemed that white perpetrators of crime, where it's not even questionable, they shoot up churches and they turn up brandishing weapons, seem to be taken into custody without, you know, anything being done to harm them. They're unhurt. They're taken into custody safely, humanely. But when it comes to black men and women, they wind up dead. And I'm just trying to be clear, is this a question of systemic racism and racial profiling that gets us to this place?
It's absolutely systemic. It's institutionalized racism, and in some instances, it's from the top, meaning the police chief, the sheriff, or the commissioner, down to the ground pounders, to the troops, to the patrol sergeants, to the patrol officers. Every police chief, every sheriff was once a deputy. Every police chief was once a police officer. And so, listen, it's not like they don't know. They've grown up in law enforcement, and they have probably participated in some of this foolishness themselves. There was a police chief over in Mississippi who said he saw nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with the murder of George Floyd. So if that's the police chief saying that, you can imagine what they talk about in roll call when there's nobody around. You can imagine what the patrol supervisors are telling their officers. You can imagine what the patrol supervisor will tell a community member when they come into the police station to file a personnel complaint, and that patrol officer thinks like that police chief. They're going to tell them to get out of my office, get out of my station. What are you in here complaining about? And so unless and until we replace those police chiefs who think like that and put in more progressive police chiefs, and I would say, dare I, more women, because women are typically nurturers. We are more empathetic, we're more compassionate, and we, I think, just by virtue of our gender, don't take things personal. When I was working patrol and in the street, and I worked during the Rodney King riots and everything else that went on the LAPD during my 20-year career, I worked with in incidents where folks who looked like me didn't like me being there and were mad at me and would call me Uncle Tom or call me the B word, whatever. But what I knew as a female is that they don't know Cheryl, they don't know me. They're mad at that uniform. And for some reason, I don't know why guys, maybe it's that testosterone that courses through their little veins, that makes them want to become like two rams just butting heads. Anytime somebody looks at you or somebody says something, we saw an example of that with Sandra Bland. That officer, Bryant Incendio, was done with her. He had written her a ticket and all he needed was a signature. And then he says to her, well, you seem kind of bothered. And Sandra said, you're damn right. Why wouldn't she be mad? You just wrote her a ticket. You're costing her money. She was trying to do you a solid by getting out the way. And the mere fact that she said, you damn right I'm mad, his little horns went up, and now he wants to ram her. The only problem is Sandra Bland didn't have the horns to ram back. Mm-hmm. And this is what we see with male officers.
Listen, I just want to, so for everybody on the thread, everyone's watching, and I just want to just re-emphasize that we are awaiting official confirmation from the Minnesota Attorney General that all 4 ex-officers, as they are now, will be charged in the George Floyd case. We are now, and just as I say that, we're now getting the word that that has occurred. For the long time, we had just heard from Senator Klobuchar, who is the senator for Minnesota, who had said that that was the expectation, and now we're getting word that that is indeed the case. Let me just bring that to you, that it has now been confirmed that Derek Chauvin's murder charge upgraded to second-degree murder, unintentional murder. The 3 other officers are charged. They're now charged. We're hearing all face. Cheryl, just so you can follow this and give me your response. According to court records, the 3 officers, Tou Thao, Thomas Lane, and J. Alexander Kueng, all face aiding and abetting second-degree murder, as well as aiding and abetting second-degree manslaughter. Additionally, Derek Chauvin's murder charge, previously 3rd degree, has been upgraded to 2nd degree unintentional murder. So previously to this, until just a few minutes ago, we only had what Senator Klobuchar had tweeted out, that these officers would all be charged. It's now being confirmed. We've looked at court records. Cheryl, your reaction that the other 3 will get 2nd degree aiding and abetting, along with aiding and abetting 2nd degree manslaughter. Your reaction?
Well, when I hear it, it sounds reasonable. It sounds right. I don't know exactly the verbiage of those charges, but certainly they did aid. They did abet. We call that on the police department acquiescing. They stood by. They did nothing. And 2 of them, Lane and Kueng, actually participated, because what we didn't see in the initial video is those two officers also with their body weight on Mr. Floyd at various positions along his torso and leg. And so while sitting on his back, lower back, holding his legs pinned to the ground would not cause death, it certainly prevented him from being able to maybe stand up if he had the will to do it and the desire to get some of that pressure off of his neck. And so absolutely, they are complicit. They held their position for minutes as well. And as trained law enforcement professionals, they had a duty and a responsibility to stop it. They participated in it, and they are equally guilty for the participation as anyone would be if they were with me, who looked like me, and I involved myself in criminality, and I committed a murder. Any of my friends that were with me would be charged as well, and so this is appropriate.
So let me ask you this: the charges have been handed down. They've been charged now, all 4 officers. But getting a charge or being charged is one thing. Getting a successful prosecution is a whole other ball game. Speak to me about why it is so difficult to successfully prosecute police officers here in the United States. Why is that?
Part of it is because great deference is given to what a police officer says, and it's very difficult to argue with someone about their perception. What officers say is in my head, what I thought, what I felt. If I tell you that you scare me right now as we're talking on this computer, it's hard for anyone to prove that you don't frighten me if I say that, right? And so that's part of the problem. And then the other issue is that for months and weeks, we're going to hear and have heard over the last few days them try to dirty up George Floyd like they do every other black person that they kill by inferring or just putting something out there in the air that may or may not be true. Because listen, once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Just like once we saw Mr. Floyd die in our presence, in our face, we can't unsee that. And so when you hear them say that, maybe he had an underlying heart condition, or maybe he was involved in passing of a fraudulent check, or maybe he was whatever they want to maybe, once you put that out there, you're talking to prospective jurors. And when jurors hear that and they think, well, yeah, if he would have just stopped, if he would have just not moved, if, well, he had to have been able to breathe because he was talking. So when you hear that kind of stuff, and it's foolishness, because being able to speak doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to take in air and at the right levels with regards to oxygen. We know this from the report by Dr. Bodden. So being able to utter a word is not proof that you're able to breathe, and certainly not proof that they weren't killing him. The man said, "You're killing me." Why wouldn't they take his word? He's not a medical professional, Derek Chauvin. He's not a medical doctor. He can't determine how much pressure this man's neck can take and whether or not he's really able to breathe. It's bothersome, all of it.
All of it is bothersome. I mean, but again, when you look at the challenges of prosecuting the police, I mean, part of it is the deference given to police. Part of it seems to me, even when they're witnesses, they're afraid to give testimony against police. Other police officers, I mean, you're a former officer. Talk to me about the code in terms of other police officers, in the case of a prosecution, I guess, switching sides. One, they would see it as such, but actually standing on the side of the victim, because it seems as if when these moments come down, police officers stand together.
Well, listen, unless and until you're criminally charged, because then an officer is no different than anybody else. It's every man or woman for themselves, and so they're going to do what they can to make sure that they get their own butt out of the ringer that it's in. So they will speak truth. Now, again, but it's going to be their perception. It's going to be for those 3. It's going to be, I didn't know what Chauvin was doing. I couldn't see. I didn't hear. I was down near his feet.
But he was motionless, right? So that's going to come into play. The fact that he was motionless for several minutes, he wasn't moving. So there was no threat, regardless of what they may claim to be in the threat, like me and you sitting here and you being threatened by me. But he was not moving. So how do you, as a defense?
Right, and that's the point. And I think these defendants should be, if they're not, they absolutely should be held to a higher standard because they're not an average citizen. They're trained police officers and they know better. And when you know better, you do better. So they will try it. Believe me, they will try it. They're going to feign ignorance. They're going to say they didn't know what was going on and they didn't hear certain things or they didn't see certain things. But at the end of the day, each and every one of them, no matter their rank, no matter their time on the job, each and every one of them is an individual, fully developed adult with common sense, one would think. And so it should be easily determinable that if you are putting your body weight on someone for an inordinate amount of time and at some point you don't feel them moving anymore, maybe you ought to just get up off of them. And so they should have done that and they didn't. And that's part and parcel of the problem. Now, the other problem with convicting police officers is who sits on these juries. And so community members, you need to stop dodging those jury summons and you need to go. You need to be a part of the process because you may be that one person on that court in that jury box who makes a difference.
Let me read some of the comments because, the thing about doing the show and why we choose to do it in this way is that we have people part of the conversation in real time and they get to speak to you directly. Thomas Failer asked this question, why do U.S. cops see African Americans as a target? We'll come to that we've talked a little bit about the racial profiling and the way communities of color are policed. Aminata Radio says that's the thing. In terms of Chauvin, he's an experienced officer. He's no rookie. He should have done better. People are asking a dubious code of silence centered around covering each other's backs. This is Aminata Radiosel again. Police fraternity. We need to hold them accountable. And she says, thank you, Ms. Dorsey. Lots of people talking about institutionalized racism. That is coming up again. King Alamo says there needs to be institutionalized reform. People saying judges have too much power in the U.S. That coming from Margaret Cole. And just a lot of people talking about, we will move on to this in a second, the violence we've seen from police officers who have been out there encountering protesters. Ibrahim Lansana says, Aisha, watching videos of police officers intimidating black African Americans shows the highest levels of racism in the U.S. We talked about the difficulties in prosecuting police here in the United States, but Cheryl, talk to me about your experiences on the force in LA, your experiences being at the precinct while you were a police officer. Did you feel that what was the level of racism? Was there, did you get a sense that you were working within an institution that had these racist attitudes? What did you personally experience? I mean, speak truth, because we don't know. We have these ideas, but what was your reality?
So let me say this. Let me quickly address the blue wall of silence, because every police chief was once a police officer, and if they wanted to create a safe zone, make sure that officers who report bad officers are not retaliated against, they could stop this tomorrow. Let me say that. In terms of racism, listen, when I joined the LAPD in 1980, I was clear. I was a black woman. I had no doubt about that. And to be honest with you, they if I hadn't known, they let me know as soon as I got in the police academy, because LAPD was under a consent decree to hire women and minorities when I joined. And so I had an academy class that was evenly split, 20 women, 20 men. I was one of 2 black women in my academy class. And so they let me know. My drill instructor, we call them DIs in the police academy, the ones that were responsible for ushering us through that process, they let me know I was a black woman. And so luckily for me,
how did they let you know?
Well, because they treated me very differently. They treated me very poorly. And listen, I'm a recruit. I'm less than talk about black people, 3/5 of a human. As a police recruit, I was, less than that, right? As a recruit, I'm not vested. You are like a child. You are to shut up. You are to watch, be seen and not heard. And so I had just quit my job that I had at Department of Justice, where I was a stenographer, to become a police officer. And so I was like, I got to get through this 6 month police academy. So I did everything scholastically that I needed to do, physically to get through PT on the fire range. I did everything so that I could graduate. And then once I graduated, I still knew I needed to hold on for 12 months of probationary training so that I could get off probation and then become vested and not easily fired. So that was the gamut that I had, the obstacle course that I had to deal with. And once I got to my division of assignment, again, thankfully, I came there knowing I was a black woman. I was clear who I was. I had already decided what kind of officer I was going to be because I had grown up in 77th Division in South Central Los Angeles, and I knew the angst that my community had with the police, but I needed a good paying job. And that's why I joined the police department. And so I had made up my mind about who I wanted to be, and I knew I needed to look myself in the mirror. And I knew that I was not going to be a part of the problem. And so when I worked with white officers, the majority of my white training officers who could have gotten rid of me during that probationary period if they had a desire, they treated me well. They trained me right. They were good to me. I had a couple who were not so much. I had a training officer about 3 months out of the academy, an Asian guy, Doug Shure. I'm going to say his name, Doug Shure, my training officer. He grabbed me and put me in a pain compliance hole, that thing that we're taught to do to hurt folks, because I wanted to eat for lunch. He had told me, I talk about this in my autobiography, he told me that as far as he was concerned, probationers could eat out of the vending machine in the police station. He refused to stop when we were driving back to the police station to allow me to buy food, because he was the driver, he was the senior, I'm the rookie, I'm the passenger. He wouldn't stop the car. So when we got back to the police station, I went across the street at Southwest to Taco Bell to get something to eat. He sees me eating, he comes over to me and puts me in a pain compliance hole. He wound up getting suspended for 5 days because of that. I then, shortly after that, had a white supervisor, my sergeant, refer to me in ways that were really untoward. This was before Me Too. And so, thankfully, I didn't have to worry about complaining. I had partners, brothers who looked like me, who had been on the job, and they said, that's some BS. And they went to the watch commander. That sergeant, Stanley Schott, I'm saying his name, was not suspended, but was administratively transferred from Southwest Division to Harbor Division Morning Watch, because of something that he had done and said about me that was racially and sexually motivated. And so that's what was happening to me while I was on probation. And then after I got off probation and I transferred to another division, ultimately wound up working Central Traffic Division, where we investigate traffic accidents. I worked with another officer whose name I'm going to say, Douglas Iverson. And so I'm saying this stuff because you guys can Google Douglas Iverson and know that in 1997, I believe it was, Douglas Iverson shot and killed a black man on Florence and Crenshaw.
Wow.
John Daniels. Why? Because Douglas Iverson didn't like black folks. And he was always messing with black tow truck drivers back in the day. And I knew about this, and I had testified at the murder trial of John Daniels against Douglas Iverson, because I knew that happened to me. And Douglas Iverson back then, you couldn't really get officers prosecuted. They tried him 3 different times, and I testified at his trial. And even with me testifying about things Douglas Iverson had done to me personally and what I knew about him and his interaction with black tow truck drivers in South Central Los Angeles, the jury still hung and could not find him guilty. And so this is nothing new.
Wow. Wow. So knowing all of that, having experienced it, and then you see those pictures of George Floyd being pinned down, and you are the mother of 4, is it 4, did I get it right? 4 black boys, black men. Speak to me not as a police officer, but as a mother, what you are feeling right now.
It angers me. It angers me because no one is immune. It could be any one of my sons. And I'm going to just say, not only am I the mother of 4 black young men, I'm a grandmother. I have grandsons, and I have a great grandson. And so what concerns me about what I see going on right now is that my great grandson may one day, I won't be here, but may one day be walking down the street and have some white police officer think that he doesn't belong in that particular part of town and do something to him, stop him, engage him, have a conversation with him, and decide that he wants to take my great grandson's life and now he's dead. And there's only one version about what happened when that officer stopped my great grandson. And that officer's word rules the day because great deference is given to what a police officer says. It makes me angry. It makes me angry because I don't see things changing anytime soon, because I don't see police chiefs being honest about the problems that are going on top down on these police departments, all 18,000 of them.
Wow. Why won't, or better yet, why do police chiefs who are part of society that makes up this country, why all the way around are so many people in positions of power, including the police, unwilling to acknowledge the inequities and the bias and the discrimination that people of color, black and brown people, face every day? Why are police chiefs, to focus on them, unwilling to acknowledge that problem and to want to do something about it so that policing becomes easier for those very officers that are patrolling those communities?
Because the system does what the system was designed to do. And listen, that's not to say that every single police chief, because there are certainly some progressive police chiefs out there. I know Seattle police chief, I believe, is very progressive. And I could rattle off probably a couple of the other departments where I've heard of police chiefs who are really doing the right thing and holding their officers accountable. But for the most part, wholesale, it's the good old boy system. And so look, let's not pretend that a thing isn't a thing. It exists. It's the good old boy system. And in addition to just the racism, you know, even with female officers being on police departments and all of what we see going on with the Me Too. I was part of that whole situation way, way before it was called Me Too. And what do they tell you? What did they tell me? Get over it. Get over it. You know, hunker down, buckle up, get over it, get tough, you know, shut up. In other words, shut up. And so you got to figure out what kind of person, who are you? Who are you? Whether you're a police officer, whether you work in a library, a hospital, a cafeteria, who are you? Who are you?
To anyone just joining us, we're talking to Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey. She was with the LAPD for a very long time, 2 decades. She is giving us her perspective on what is playing out in the US right now, the protests, the killing of George Floyd. Send in your questions. We do these deep dive Wednesdays, so you can ask any question you have on your mind about the situation here in the US and be part of the conversation. Cheryl, back to you. You know, we talk about black men being killed, but black women also are being killed as well. And that doesn't rise to the same level of, not that it doesn't rise to the same level of outrage, but it doesn't feel as if it gets as much attention. Why is that?
Maybe because it doesn't happen as often, and God forbid, I don't want women to be getting killed at the same rate that men are so that it can get that kind of attention. I'd like to see this thing nipped in the bud right now. And to your earlier question, you know, police chiefs know this, serve at the pleasure of a mayor who's an elected official. Sheriffs are elected officials. And so it's incumbent upon the community to make sure that they get involved and get engaged, vote out. Vote for people who are concerned about your quality of life issues. If you have a police chief who doesn't see anything wrong with an officer sitting on the neck of a black man for 9 seconds, you guys need to get you a new police chief. And I know of at least one that said that in Mississippi. And so that's why this stuff continues to happen. And sadly, it's happening to our black women as well to a lesser degree, but it's happening nonetheless.
Desmond Canna says this. He said, I used to see the US as paradise, but with the recent happenings, I see US as doom for black people. Desmond, thanks for the comment. Cheryl, I mean, you did just say that you don't see change imminently on the horizon. I mean, so how can you say to someone like Desmond that he's wrong to be despondent about what black people face here in the US?
I don't see a change unless we, black folks, brown folks, others of color, because listen, it could happen to anyone. Poor white folks, it's happening to them too. If we don't hold these people that are in positions of authority, if we don't hold their feet to the fire, then it won't change. If you know that a police chief is allowing an officer to stay on his department who's been involved in 18 personnel complaints, you need to have a fireside chat community with that police chief. And if you can't reason and get to him, then you need to go right to the mayor. Because until you change it from the top, police chiefs have tremendous autonomy. Now they're starting to say things like, we want to get an independent civilian review board. That's helpful, but they make recommendations. The chief can still say, oh, thank you for their recommendation, and do what they want.
These review boards have no teeth. I mean, that's the thing. We need meaningful change in this country, and meaningful bodies that you can't have the police policing themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the pressure is going to come from the outside community inward. No more blue ribbon panels. I love you, Senator Cory Booker, but we don't need a national registry. We don't need a list of names. We need consequences. We need accountability. And Cory Booker and anybody else who might be thinking about doing something about this, presidential nominee for the Democratic Party, Mr. Biden, if anybody from his camp wants to know what real accountability is, because see, it's easy to say we need accountability, but y'all not saying what that means. What does it look like? Hit me up and I'll tell you what accountability should look like, how we really stop white police officers from killing our sons, our brothers, our fathers, our uncles.
Melissa Marietta Gooding writes, second degree unintentional. The second degree murder charge should be intentional. They intended to kill him because they ignored the bystanders and victims' plea to allow him to breathe. Your thoughts, Cheryl?
Well, listen, the district attorney is going to present the case in a way that they think they can win, because district attorneys want to win. And that's in any case. And that's why you see so many times people are arrested because the officer says he was resisting or he was interfering, and then the next thing you know, the charges are dropped, DA reject, because the DA doesn't want to take a case to court that they don't think they can win. Now, they know they're not going to win everything, but they really only want winners. And so they're going with a case that they think they can convince a jury, because whatever we say is one thing, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to convince those 12 people on that jury that it was intentional. And it's very, very difficult to argue what I intend. It's difficult to say what I intend. If I say, as I said before, what's in my head, you cannot debate with me about what's in my head. And that's what police officers do time and time again. And because people, community, jurors, white folks want to give police the benefit of the doubt, they say, yeah, it's a tough job, it's hard, and yeah, I don't think he meant to kill Mr. Floyd. Well, hell, he sat on his neck for 9 minutes. What did he think would happen? But I don't think he meant to do it.
I can't breathe. He said, right. You're killing me.
Right. But how do you convince 12 people? It's hard to get 2 people to agree on a thing. And this is why the district attorney is going with something that they believe, they think, they're hopeful they will be able to convince 12 people of. And it's offensive. It's offensive. But, sometimes you just have to hold your nose to get to the bottom line. And then once we get a conviction, he doesn't get to get a slap on the hand like Officer Liang did, who shot and killed Akai Gurley, probation, or the officer who shot and killed Laquan McDonald, 7 years. Mm-hmm. We need a charge, a penalty, a prison time term that is commensurate with what he did.
Marietta, thank you for that comment. I want to ask you this, Cheryl, because I think it's such an important point. This from Martha Sesay. The Sesays were everywhere. Says, thank you, Martha, for writing in. She says, before recruiting police officers, do they do background checks on them to check their history?
Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. We know that in the case of Timothy Loman, the officer who shot and killed Tamir Rice, they didn't do a background check, because had they done a thorough check, they would have known that he was summarily shown the door at the other police department, because he even frightened their own deputy chief by his own admission. And so sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And sometimes it's not thorough, because everybody is different. What they need to do, what they should do, Senator Cory Booker, we need police officers psychologically evaluated every 2 years. Joe Biden, we need police officers psychologically evaluated every 2 years. Crack open their head, make sure everything is working right. And if it's not, there is no shame, there is no harm. Please, please get them off the police department. Do not allow these officers to stay on until something makes national news, as in the case of Michael Schlager shooting Walter Scott, as in the case of George Floyd. Now, we know this officer was bad. We know he was out of control, on duty and off duty. We're hearing now that an employer at a local bar said he was heavy-handed there. He wanted to mace people on the nights when there were black patrons, not so much on the night when there were white patrons. There's always red flags. Police chiefs look the other way. We need them to be held accountable. Stop looking the other way, police chiefs.
Let me bring this to you. Conta M. Conda says, hi, I live in Germany. My little girls, 7 and 5, want to visit the US, but I always tell them it's dangerous for black people to go there because mostly they get killed by police, and now this. Did I do a bad thing by telling my kids such a thing? Conta, thank you for writing in. Cheryl, what's your perspective on how do you communicate? This comes to the question of communicating the risk to young people, to our children, our loved ones. What do you say about the threat faced by black people here in this country, specifically when it comes to their engagement with law enforcement? What did
I
you
want people to,
let's start with
I want people to know that it's the minority. It's the minority, but it's just like the local news. If it bleeds, it leads, right? And so the officers who are misbehaving, we see that time and time again. We don't see officers doing a good job. We don't see officers helping, doing good deeds, helping someone who's down on their luck or who may have been charged with a crime because they didn't have money to feed their family and they were shoplifting and the officer bought food for them and took them home. We don't see that. It's not sexy. So let's not pretend like this is everybody, because it isn't. But what we need to do is we need to have a conversation with our family members, and we need to have them understand what it is that they need to do, because family has a responsibility to comport themselves in a way. It doesn't make you a punk. It doesn't make you less than. Don't make you none of that. It makes you I need you to come home. That's what I tell my sons. I need you to come home. I need you to survive that police encounter. If an officer could be dead ass wrong, but I want you to shut up. I want you to come home. And then I want you to sit down with me and we will deal with this the way policy and procedure and protocol has set up for us to file a complaint or to get an attorney. But you cannot hold court curbside and expect to walk away. You will run into a Chauvin, a Brian Encinia, Timothy Loman, someone who wants to punish you because they can with impunity. I need you to survive the police encounter.
That's so, I have lived here for almost 15 years, and it's so heartbreaking, because what you're effectively saying is that it is what it is. You know, you cannot expect fairness, or you cannot expect that your safety is guaranteed when you encounter law enforcement as a person of color. That's incredibly upsetting to hear. I know, not just to me, but to everybody who's watching. And you were a police officer for almost 20 years. How do you reconcile that?
Listen, I'm a black woman. I'm a black woman first. And so I get it. I get it, because when I walk out my doors, all they see is my black skin. I get stopped by the police, but I know the lingo. I know what to say. And so, I say the things that are going to calm them down immediately. And then, of course, I show them my credentials. And when they see my rank, I get it. For the, commanders and captains out there, I'm just a little old police sergeant, but it holds some weight. And so when patrol officers stop me and see that I'm a patrol sergeant, they give me the respect that's due to that position. And I know that everybody doesn't get that. I got 4 sons, and every time they leave the house, I'm not worried about it, but because my sons know what to do. I've told them how to comport themselves. I mean, there's still a possibility you could do everything right. I make no guarantees that if you follow the orders, they still won't kill you. Because understand this, once an officer kills you, there's only one version, the one they give. So I know that there are no guarantees, but let's not get our feelings hurt because they won't treat us right. If you sitting around waiting on white folks to treat you right, you'll be waiting a long time.
John Gordon said this: policing is only ever effective when there is trust in the equation, period. John Gordon, thank you for writing in. Your thoughts on that, Cheryl?
And trust has been broken, and it's going to take a long time to build that trust back up, just like in any any relationship, right? If you're in a romantic relationship and someone is not, the infidelity is an issue, and they breach the trust, it takes a long time to bridge that gap. And so trust is broken between police and community, and that's why part of the problem is that the police chiefs need to first admit there's a problem. If you're not willing to admit that there's a problem, then we don't have anything to discuss about fixing, because you don't even acknowledge that there's a problem. So we need police chiefs, sheriffs, commissioners to admit you got a problem, admit you got a few officers on your department who shouldn't be there. Everybody that wants to be the police shouldn't be. A couple of them made it through. So let's crack their little heads open, look in, and make sure that they're not on your department. And when you find them, when they show you red flags, 18 personnel complaints, how about you deal with it at personnel complaint maybe 3 or 4? If Chauvin had been fired around 6 or 7 personnel complaints, George Floyd would be here.
Mm-hmm. This all brings us to, you talked about the police chiefs. Let's talk about national leadership. We're going to go a little bit longer because more people have questions that are coming in, and I think this is an important moment. And, you know, how often do you get to speak directly to someone who's been on the inside as a sergeant who is speaking such truth and speaking with such candor? You talked about, as long as that's okay with Cheryl, who I'm just like capturing now for an extra 15, 20 minutes. You talked about police chiefs. But what about national leadership? And in this moment, your thoughts on President Trump's response to this moment?
President Trump is President Trump. And listen, I had someone ask me the other day if he disappoints me. He doesn't. I want him to change nothing. I want him to continue to do and say the stupid stuff that he says right through the election. Because if people don't hear and see him being foolish and reckless, then they will forget what we just went through, what's been going on, because we have short-term memory. And so listen, he's talking to his base, he's talking to a small group of people who are going to be behind him no matter what he says. And so we need not focus on him. What we need to think about are the other elected officials who do have some sway, folks who collect copious amounts of money from police unions to their campaigns and have a hard time voting for things that are in contradiction to what those police unions want. If you've just given me $1 million on my campaign, then obviously I'm not going to be voting for anything that has to do with oversight or reform or anything else. So that's something that people should look to. You should look to your legislators for making reform to the police officers' Bill of Rights. And when they say things like we want accountability, hold them to the fire and ask them to articulate specifically with specificity, what do you mean? Because you know what accountability looks like to you, community. You know what accountability looks like you to family members who have lost a loved one. And it's not just giving me millions of dollars because you killed my son, my father, my brother. It's changing the way police communities and holding them accountable, having there be a substantive consequence when they violate that trust, and then maybe we can say we're getting some real accountability.
There are some really fascinating questions being put to you that I've got to ask you, Cheryl, to respond to. George Kamara writes this. Thank you, George. He says, isn't it ironic that your safety cannot be guaranteed as a black man with a police officer who took the oath to protect you? How do you square that circle?
So again, I want to emphasize it's the minority. It's the minority of officers who are not keeping us safe. It's the minority of officers who are showing up on welfare checks or radio calls when someone has a family member that's dealing with a mental breakdown, if you will, and you call the police to help because you don't know what else to do with this family member, and the police show up and they kill them. That happens. We have to acknowledge it. We have to admit it. We have to make sure that our officers are better trained, or that we have professionals who know what to do when you're dealing with someone with a mental illness, accompany officers. Because listen, the police are not going anywhere. And I know young folks would like to, do away with police departments. That's not going to happen. But I'm going to have to, Isha, I'm sorry. I would love to stay because I could yammer on, but I've got another conflicting appointment that I must take.
Right. You take that call. We appreciate your time today, Cheryl. I know how it is because this is a moment where people like yourself are in demand. So thank you. You jump off. I'm going to stay with the viewers. Thank you. We'll invite you back to keep the conversation going. Thank you. Be safe.
Well, family, there you have it. It was a very spirited debate, discussion, passion-filled, with Isha Sesay. And so I am so appreciative that she brought me on to speak my truth. And listen, you saw when you wind me up and let me go, ooh, wee. So I'm just going to repeat here again now. I shared with you some stories that I talk about in detail in my autobiography, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate, available on my website, www.sgtdorseyspeaks.com. Also, you heard me mention that there's much talk from the Democratic presumptive nominee, Joe Biden, right? About, what he wants to do. And I'm hearing folks on my social media platforms saying that, what's his black agenda? We need to know. Well, he's talking a lot about, police reform and yada, 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 yada. So here's what I want you to do, family. Call to action. Reach out to Uncle Joe and tell him that you know somebody who would love, love, love to have a conversation with him about what real police reform, accountability, transparency looks like. Senator Cory Booker over in New Jersey is talking about creating a national registry. And you've already heard, while, I hate black on black crime, so I don't want to go after the senator. But listen, do we really need a list of officers on a national level who are cutting up? Don't police departments already keep a list of officers who misbehave? Of course they do. And so they have a list. Sometimes they check it twice, and then they do nothing substantive to stop the bad behavior. So could you New Jersey people reach out to your senator over there? Because I know that a lot of these folks, if you're not a constituent, then they're not really interested in what you have to say. So call to action. Reach out to Senator Cory Booker, who's creating that national registry, and tell him that Sergeant Dorsey over in LA would like to holler at him about what might be helpful in addition to that national registry. So listen, family, it costs you nothing but time and just a little bit of that to tweet to Senator Cory Booker, tweet to Joe Biden, get on their email, send them an email, call their office. I personally have reached out to some of the folks, the handlers of Joe Biden, and it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? And unless you can break through that firewall, crickets. So I'm not mad at him. Simone Sanders, I reached out to her on Twitter some time ago. She's his campaign manager. Crickets. So I'm just assuming, I'm not, saying that, she ignored me on purpose. I'm sure she's a very busy woman. She probably gets all sorts of folks that reach out to her and maybe, didn't know that, I was legitimate and not a wingnut. So I need you to help me help you. Reach out to Joe Biden and Senator Cory Booker over in New Jersey and tell them that you've heard of a lady who has a YouTube channel, a podcast, a Twitter account, an Instagram account, and a Facebook account who talks weekly about how we can improve community police relations. And man, do we need to get on this, not now, but right now. So family, that's it. I just wanted to share with you because I love it when I have an opportunity to talk with a real bona fide interviewer, And like I said, when they wind me up and let me go, it's a good time. Until next time, family, continue to practice safe social distancing. Continue to be very careful as curfews are, hours are changed, curfews are lifted. Be careful out there, because, you know, they could lift a curfew today and, you know, then you're out there and all of a sudden they're like, oh no, we didn't, we really didn't lift that curfew, sir. Now that you're out here, ma'am, I need to holler at you. So don't get got, family. We'll talk again real soon. Be good. Be safe.